think I've got a few minutes for questions.
My question is on the small aircraft, this 55 pounds and under. I thought they were going to come out with even a micro one that was 4 pounds or under. Am I correct? Or
Okay, so in the notice of proposed rulemaking, but not in the actual proposed rules text, we announced that we were interested in proposals for creating a subcategory called micro unmanned aircraft. And in that category, we had a whole bunch of potential. Yes. So the micro UAS option. Some countries have this, some don't. There is a lot of them have chosen the 2 kilograms. I've been around the world asking my compatriots and other civil aviation authorities, where did that come from? And most of them say, well, it just seemed like a good break point. There's really no science behind the fact that 2 kilograms. I always like to point out, bullets are measured in grams and they're very lethal. So it's really more about the energy than it is about the weight. One of the ideas was, well, if it was frangible and it hit you, it'd fall apart, it wouldn't kill you. So we wanted to know information about that. Lower speed, lower altitude, with the idea that we could authorize flight over people if that was the case. Might even be able to reduce the pilot requirements. We asked for proposals. We essentially said, we don't have the information to justify doing this. We want the industry to tell us how to justify creating this subcategory. And that's what we requested. So if any of you out there have any information about how to protect people on the ground from 2 kilogram aircraft and why it should be allowed, then we'd love to hear that in the comment period.
And I just have one other question. On the 25-mile rule around the White House, is that still in play for no flight zone?
So the restricted airspace is actually, I believe, 15 miles radius centered on National Airport.
Okay.
If you pull up the aeronautical charts or you search on Google Maps, you can find out what the no-fly area is in the Washington D.C. area. But that is no model rocketry, no model aircraft, nothing without permission from the Secret Service. It's a national security thing, and it doesn't have anything to do with the FAA per se, which we just enforce it. Some people who have operated in this area have gotten visits from the FBI asking them to stop. The individual who crash landed his DJI Phantom actually it was his roommate's DJI Phantom. I love the fact that he crashed somebody else's gun. And this is a guy with a security clearance, a top secret security clearance. But anyway, he fortunately for him did not get charged with any crimes, but he could have.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, for coming today and addressing this issue. Just real quick, have any impression on the number and quality of comments received to date on the NPR?
Well, I won't make any comments on the quality, but there are 6,000 currently have been filed, which we're looking at as a good thing. It's a lower number than we were afraid we would get in. No, I'm sorry, there's 3,000. They're projecting, based on the current rate they're coming in, we'll wind up with about 6,000 at the end. So if that's the number, then that's good. That'll help us move through the process quicker. Every comment has to be read. It has to be adjudicated. Now we bucket them so that if you get 1,000 write-in campaign for a certain thing, you put them all in and you answer them once. But nonetheless, they all have to be assessed and answered.
Yes, I was wondering, how long is the review of the exemption applications taking?
So that's a good question. We have an internal goal of 120 working days for every exemption, and that was in existence before we started this, and we've been doing our best to meet that. When we started the 333 exemption process, we had no idea it would be quite so popular. So we've subsequently had to take a process that was designed for the exceptions. It required a lot of deliberation and turn it into an approval process that will allow us to move forward more rapidly. A couple of weeks ago, we put into place a new process, checklist-based, that we compare against the ones that have been published for public comment. And if they're substantially the same, then we use a streamlined process called the summary grant, which essentially says, hey, it's just like one that we've already approved. We don't have to go through the public comment process, and we're begun to be able to issue them much quicker. You got to understand that the exemption process is a rulemaking process and is subject to the restrictions that exist in law for how you go about doing federal rules. So we've accelerated it. We think we're now going to start really cranking them out quickly, but it hasn't really settled down into a routine yet, so I can't really give you an estimate of how much it's going to improve. We have yet to exceed the number going out with the number coming in. So it's been a difficult process, but we're getting better. Lots more are coming out. So hopefully we'll by the end of this fiscal year we'll begin to catch up and move forward. Ultimately, though, this is just an interim step until we get to the small pool.
Mr. Williams, again, thank you for being here today. This is very helpful. A question has arisen regarding governmental agencies who currently are required to have a COA in order to fly a UAS. But in the future, according to some interpretations of the NPRM, it would be possible for a government agency to declare that the work that they're doing is commercial and therefore be able to avoid the COA process. Is that the intention of the rules of the FAA?
So currently, government entities can operate under the civil rules. So, for example, many states provide air ambulance service. The state of Maryland has air ambulance service provided by the state through the state police. They operate as a public aircraft operator, and as such, they are not allowed to charge anybody for a ride in their air ambulance. Normally, insurance companies will pay for part or all of that. They're not allowed to take that because of the restrictions on public aircraft operations. Now, the state can choose to operate under the air ambulance rules and come in and get approved to operate as an air ambulance operator, and then they could receive compensation for that flight because they're switching to following the commercial rules. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to try to justify whether or not it's okay for them to be competing with private entities or not. I think that's probably something that would vary from state to state anyway. But from a regulatory standpoint, we don't care. You're either following the public aircraft operating rules or you're following the civil aircraft operating rules. From a safety standpoint, that's all we are concerned about. The economic impact of that's somebody else's problem to sort out. And a lot of people have said, well, that's not fair, they can compete with private industry. And I said, well, it doesn't have anything to do with the safety of their operation. So we're saying in the preamble, we actually discussed that that it is conceivable that public operators would choose to operate under these rules, just like manned aircraft operators choose to operate under the civil rules versus the public operating rules.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, for coming today. A quick question I could about the life cycle of 333 exemptions in comparison to the NPRM and its execution. You mentioned earlier the idea of add-ons, additional rulemaking to fly over people not involved in operations and so forth. Can you just clarify a little of how you see the life cycle of the 333 process, particularly as it relates to, as I understand, all exemptions now still require a private pilot's license as part of the 333, which would not be the case under an NPRM, correct? So if you could elaborate, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, so several questions rolled up into one there. First off, like I've said, the 333 is an exemption process which any citizen of the United States can petition the FAA for an exemption to any of the rules if they can make the case that they have an equivalent level of safety to the way the rule works. And so anybody can continue to do that. It has nothing to do with whether the NPRM comes out or not. However, obviously it's much easier to operate under the rules than it is to come up with an exemption. Now, I think given the restrictions in 107, we're probably going to have exemptions come in to ask to operate beyond the limits of 107, the same way we're having under 333. But at least we'll have the pilot piece taken care of. The reason, and we recently just dropped that requirement from a private pilot to a sport pilot. The law requires every civil aircraft be operated by a certificated airman. That's in the law. We can't exempt anything that's in the law. So you have to have, until 107 comes out and creates a new certificate for unmanned aircraft pilots, you still have to have one of the existing certificates in order to legally operate an aircraft in the National Airspace System of the United States. So that's why we have that requirement now, and we recently lowered it. Another reason why we have that requirement is in the section 333, there's the evaluation we have to make is that is it safe, and does it not present a hazard to national security? So is it good policy for national security? Every licensed airman gets vetted by the TSA. So that's how we're saying, no, it doesn't present a risk to national security. FAR 107 operator certificates will also get vetted by the TSA to make sure that you're acceptable risk to security by having one of these licenses. So that's the rationale behind those processes. We think that the volume will drop way off once the small rule is final, but I also think there'll continue to be a smattering of exemptions for people who have justification to go beyond the limits of what we're proposing in the small rule. So with that, I hope you all have enjoyed your lunch and that I have given you a little bit of information. And I just want to leave you with one final thought. Go Nats!